Greetings to you all, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. Thank you to all the elite members of Back to Ashes. You have my deepest gratitude. For the important information, please see the description below. If you are ready to dive into today's stories, sit back, relax, kick back, or grab your snacks or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled 7 True Scary Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. This was probably about 10 years back when this happened, and I happened to be driving home from work late at night as I usually do. I take back roads to get home before turning onto the main road, which takes me back to my house. Once I had turned onto the main road, it turns into 2 lanes on either side of the road for a brief moment. There was nothing on the right side of the road, just trees and a small open field with more trees in the distance, with houses on the left side of the road. The hill slopes down just a little bit before dipping upwards at an incline, so I was at the dip at the moment. I had noticed right after turning about 50 feet in front of my car off to the right side of the road, there looked to be a guy standing there wearing a white hoodie. I wasn't sure what he was doing, thinking he was trying to cross the road, but I couldn't see any other part of him other than the white hoodie. I remember thinking to myself, what the hell is this guy doing? To get a better look, I turned on the high beams to see what he was doing, and as soon as I did, the guy just literally floated super quickly across the other side of the road, and he was nowhere to be seen after that. It didn't look like he was running, as his body remained constant and glided so quickly across the road. It definitely freaked me out a bit, as I'd never seen anything like that before. There was quite literally no trace of this guy at all once he ran across, as if he just disappeared. I know I wasn't imagining it, as I had slowed down, thinking that someone was trying to cross the road. Has anyone had something like this ever happen to them before? A few weeks ago, I was driving in the middle of nowhere, heading to one of my friends. My wife was sleeping next to me, while my teenage daughters were watching a movie in the back. Next to them, my toddler was playing with his toys. It was around 1 a.m., and I was nervous as the drive there seemed to last forever. The dirt road with no lights gave me chills, as all I could see around were only fields. The road had many holes, and I was trying to avoid them as much as I could. I was very focused on that when I saw in front of the car a luggage. It was in the middle of the road, on my side. On the other side, the car was parked, facing us. The car was completely in the dark, as there were no lights inside or outside of it. I did not want to drive over their luggage, so my first instinct was to go out and move it. I was lucky to have my wife with me. She grabbed my hand and indicated me something on the right. One person was in the field, looking sometimes at his phone, reason for which my wife saw him in the first place. I turned my car around, and I was ready to leave this road when 2 people jumped out in front of us from the field. There was no space on the road, so I couldn't go without harming them. 2 people in front of my car, 1 luggage, a car, and the person checking their phone in the field were behind us. I did not know what to do, so I did the only thing that I thought of. I just turned around again, facing the luggage, and just drove over it. Fortunately, there was nothing inside it to damage my car, so we got out of this situation completely unharmed. We arrived at my friend's house and everything was perfect, and we had a great time there. However, I still have chills when I am thinking about this incident. So, people from the field, I hope we never meet again. I need to preface two things first. English isn't my native language, so if certain parts do not make sense, I am sorry. Two, my interpretation of the event described here is tainted by having escaped two possible kidnappings and one street attack situation. I'll describe these at the end of the story, but they're probably not essential. So, this happened 3 days ago. It was around 11:20 p.m., and I was coming home from a shift. I had my earbuds in because I usually call someone when I walk home at that time. It's a 10-minute walk, by the way. This time, however, I hadn't called anyone yet because I was reading something. I cut through a usually well-lit path at night. During the day, a lot of families come there to rest on the grass and look at the trees. It's like a green space between two short buildings, allowing you to go from one street to another, and you can cross it in under 20 seconds. So I'm doing my thing. Mind you, I walk this path every day, multiple times a day, weekly at night coming home from work, and I've lived here for like 4 years. Had one scare there, though, 2 years ago. I'll detail that later. The lampposts are lighting the concrete path, and there's patches of grass on both sides. Trees are spaced out along the way, and there are a few benches. After 5 seconds, I pass by the first bench and almost slip on what felt like a huge patch of mud, which was very strange because it hadn't rained. So I steady myself, and while I do so, I hear something rustling leaves in the hedges near the fence behind me on my left side. Then, as I started walking again, I heard crunching in the grass with what I recognized as footsteps. Judging by the sound, it was almost likely heavy, not like a squirrel or a cat. I didn't turn around and quicken my pace. I try walking on the edge of the grass after 5 more seconds, and it's dry. 5 seconds after that, I see a patch of tall dirt with tire imprints, like bike tires. So I try walking there, and it's also dry. The concrete was dry too. I get out of there and don't hear any more footsteps. Once I cross the roads and turn towards my street, I call who I am supposed to call to reassure themselves and myself too. Nothing happened, but I'm also thinking I escaped something that could have. The next afternoon, there wasn't anything by the first bench where I had almost slipped the night before. So, what was it? Here are the past situations. Circa 2010. I'm about 10-ish. Looked older, though, because I was developing early. Coming home from a friend's house on a street down from mine. A group of 3 young men, about 20-ish, I would say, insisted I climbed with them in their car. Wouldn't believe I was 10 or take no for an answer. Sped off when I yelled out, "Dad, Mom," and ran away. 2019. I'm 19 and in the subway heading home from theater practice at around 11 p.m. I have baggy, dark, comfy clothes on. I notice 3 guys slightly older starting to stare and talking in hushed voices. My station's there, so I wait until the last moment to sprint out of the doors. Unfortunately, they open back up again when I'm halfway up the stairs. I see them get out and run. I speed up and get out of the station. No security agent inside, and decide to book it for my street. Thankfully, the light is green for me, so I can cross, and I hide in a corner, watching them come out and look around, asking each other, "Can you see her?" I go home safely after that. 2022. I'm about to turn 23 years of age, coming home from a babysitting shift. I cut through the same path as described in the recent event. That night, the lights were off, but I really didn't want to go all day around and risk being exposed for like 20 minutes until I was home instead of the 4 minutes it would take to get home from there. I enter the path and see a man on the phone speaking in our language. I had on a red sweater, and as soon as I passed by him, he switched to another language, and I thought I recognized the word for red. I turned around and he was walking out of the path. I took my sweater off and hid it as best as I could by wrapping in my scarf, still walking. I come to the crosswalk and see a car turning their headlights on and starting its engine down the road. I run across both crosswalks, while they had to drive all the way up the road and make a steep turn. I get near my apartment and hide behind a little walled-off thing we have for our dumpsters. I see a car coming from their direction and slowing down, two men looking. They exit our street, so I get inside the building and watch them pass the second time. I then get to my flat, unsure about what just happened. Camping in the Big Blue Ridge Mountains can be weird. Every time the fire died, the woods came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring. The story I'm sitting down to tell is a true one experienced by a faithful friend of mine, Sam, and I. I am often reluctant to tell this story at length to most people, as the subject matter is unexplainable and rather strange. I don't want to be viewed as the superstitious nut. But having guided all across the country and having extensive experience in many environments around the United States, I feel I have the authority to tell this story. Essentially, what I'm saying is, I've been around in the deep, dark hollows all across North America and never experienced something so strange as I did that night. I don't fancify my experiences in the woods, nor do I hopefully imagine there's something more to a twig breaking. As someone who has spent a good deal of time in the woods knows, there's no reason to. Eventually, you'll experience something daring or fantastic. I am a hunter first and foremost, and to a hunter, there's always an explanation, a reason to the wilderness and her inhabitants. It's how we identify patterns and exploit an animal's rhythm to make a successful hunt. As a hunter, you are a sort of woodsman detective, piecing together clues to set yourself up for success. Let's just say this tale is a cold case. Let's get into it. It was early summer, and I was itching to go camping. I had recently received a new tent and was eager to use it. I called up my good buddy Sam, and we planned out our camping adventure. We considered going up to the Grayson Highlands or even south into North Carolina. After debating it, we decided it would be more fun to camp somewhere we wouldn't run into any other people. Deep in the woods, far from anyone else, where we would bushcraft, hoot and holler, and bring a gun without fear of scaring the yuppies camping next to us. While we both lived in the woods, I definitely had access to the most remote stretch of woods between us. So we loaded up our stuff and began hiking deep into the valley below my childhood home. The hike was almost completely straight down a steep hillside, deep into a hollow that held a small patch of flat land, a floodplain area and creek. The small creek that ran gave the area a beautiful ambience. Early signs of summer were visible all around, and the weather was great. We hiked until we felt the need to start gathering firewood before nightfall. Behind us was a steep hillside that rose into the west for miles. In front of us was the creek, and to the left the start of another ridge and hillside that rose high into the east and north. To our right, the valley we were in continued to go down, cutting a deep valley, and on the other side of the creek, another ridge, separated by a small stream from the ridge to the left, rose into the west and to the south. Those two ridges in front of us ran for miles, and the little valley formed by the small creek split those ridges for a long ways up until it hit the springhead. This is important for later in the story. Off to the right, further down the valley, more splits into the ridge are made by little tributaries. We started building camp by clearing the brush and leaves away and constructing a small fire pit. I placed a tarp on the ground to separate my tent from the damp earth. Remember this, the tarp extended out roughly a foot on each side of my tent. Sam had a hammock that he planned to sleep in. I've only ever camped in a hammock once and it didn't go great. But I didn't say anything to him, thinking that maybe he would enjoy it. We gathered a hefty load of firewood, consisted of some reasonably dry stuff. It was shaping up to be a really nice camping trip. I've spoken about the joy of being out there before, so I won't beat a dead horse, but it was really nice to be away from people. Sam and I sat around the fire and shot the shit until the sun went down. Now, one of the things Sam and I have always bonded on has been Bigfoot shows. We're both skeptics, and I would say we hold a similar or the same opinion on the subject. Our interest is less about believing in Bigfoot, but rather we just find the subject matter to be nostalgic, silly, and a fun thing to joke about. So I brought up the idea to Sam that we begin to hunt Bigfoot. He laughed and thought it was a great idea. So we began doing the antics they do in the Finding Bigfoot TV show. We start with the classic tree knocks. A tree knock, for those unaware, is when you use a stick to beat on a tree, making a loud knocking sound that echoes throughout the forest. Supposedly, Sasquatch communicate this way. We didn't think anything of it at all. As I said before, we didn't really believe. We were just joking about. So we began by knocking on the tree, and then stopping and listening for a response. After a few times of doing this, we paused, and hearing nothing, I began to think of a joke to crack and something else to do. Before I could open my mouth, we heard, clear as day, a tree knock far off somewhere on the ridge to the left. I looked at Sam and said, "Dude." Sam just looked back at me in surprise. I then did some more knocks and we listened again. Then off in the distance, we heard more knocks in response. Then the other ridge to the right, we began hearing knocks. Sam at this point was beginning to get freaked out a little and was perplexed as to what it could be. I, at the time, was such a hard skeptic I carried on and insisted that it was a person or a woodpecker. But who in the world would be out there, deeper in the woods than we are on private land? What woodpecker makes 3 loud booming knocks on a tree that sound exactly like the knocks we make? Sam voiced his rebuttal. I ignored these arguments and held strong to the fact that there is no Bigfoot. I then insisted that we push the envelope by doing whoops and howls, just like they do on TV. Sam was not very enthused by this idea, being the humbler and smarter one of us that night, knowing sometimes there's certain things you do not mess with. But At the time, I was full of piss and vinegar and stubborn as a mule about the fact that Bigfoot is not real. I also had brought a gun with me and was certain I could fight off anything we would need to fight off. So we started howling into the woods. It was dark that night, being a new moon, and beyond the firelight, you couldn't see a damn thing. We would howl and wait, listening for reply. After a few howls, the excitement of, "What was that?" started to fade, and my logical, rational, science-based theory of a woodpecker began to appear true. Then, out of the dark distance came one of the strangest sounds I have ever heard. A howl. Not a canine howl. Not an owl's hoot. But a fucking ape howl. Sam's eyes were as big as back hog tires, and even I was finding it hard to reason that one. Despite this, I continued my ignorant stubbornness and threw out another howl. Off to the left ridge, it replied to us again, the clearest ape whoop I've ever heard, as if it were recorded by researchers in the Congo. I looked at Sam, myself feeling more curious and excited than anything else. I reiterated, "Dude." Then, something truly unexplainable and spooky happened. More whoops and howls began on the ridge to the right and further down the valley. And they weren't random. They had etiquette, as if they were chatting back and forth with each other. The one to the left would howl. The one to the right would whoop and howl. The first would respond, and then the one way down the valley would chime in. Sam was really freaked out now and began considering if we should leave. I, being a stubborn idiot, claimed it was owls. Owls? We were both raised in these hollers. I've heard owls. You're going to tell me that was an owl? Have you ever in your life heard an owl that sounded like a fucking ape? Sam argued against my claim. Well, no, but there's no way Bigfoot is real. It has to be a bunch of owls speaking to each other. There's nothing else it could be, I replied, half laughing in astonishment and disbelief of what was unfolding that night. Sam and I kind of bickered for a minute over it and then decided the wisest decision was to stop antagonizing whatever it was in the woods, miles around us, whooping and knocking. It wasn't too long after that we decided to go to bed. I crawled into my tent and Sam into his hammock. We left the fire going, and every time the fire died down, the woods came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring. All around camp, we could hear what sounded like things being thrown and footsteps. From time to time, we would hear another knock or another howl coming from a new position. Sam would leap out of his hammock and chuck loads of wood onto the fire and make it as big as possible. He would then lay back down to sleep. This repeated about 3 more times. Each time the fire died, things got spookier and spookier. A few times, Sam would say, "Did you hear that?" And every time, I would just blame it on possums nearing camp, hoping to find food scraps. Well, about the 3rd time, Sam ran out of firewood, meaning that this time when the fire died, it died for good, leaving us to the dark void of the Appalachian Holler. I vividly remember I had fallen asleep before the fire died, and after it died, there was so much stirring around camp, I began to wake up. I was slowly waking up, thinking I was having some sort of nightmare, when I finally fully sobered and realized that my dream was pleasant. It was reality that was full of frightening sounds and things that go bump in the night. The woods around us had become loud with unexplainable movement. The movement of multiple large things. The whooping and knocking had stopped, which did not comfort me, with all the new sounds right outside my door. There was maybe a 30-yard perimeter around camp that the sounds did not cross. Then, suddenly, an extremely loud crashing began through the twigs, leaves, and branches. It was something large, running full sprint through the woods, starting maybe 50 yards away and running straight towards our camp. It grew louder and louder until the sound of crushing leaves turned to crinkling tarp. The creature was standing on the tarp my tent was situated on. I was frozen, like a child frozen in fear, eyes wide open. My heart was pounding out of my chest so hard I thought it would explode. I then heard high above my tent, not near the ground, not 4 feet up, but high above my tent, the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. It was the sound of a huff and blow, exactly the way you hear a gorilla do on TV, or how the apes in Planet of the Apes do it. 3 forceful huff and blows. Then the creature turned around and ran back the way it came, back into the darkness of the night. Sam practically leapt out of his hammock and said, "You had to have heard that, right?" I replied with, yeah, let's get the fuck out of here." I slid around into the chamber of my 30-30 and crawled out of the tent. We both got busy grabbing only our essentials and started out of the woods. Using shitty dim flashlights, we made our way up the hill, frantically looking behind us into the terrible night and trying to move fast without running. We hiked a long ways, and by the time we made it back to the house, it was far past midnight. We never did see what it was that charged us, and we never did hear anything else after that. But whatever it was, scared us enough to make us hike out in the dead of the night and leave all of our gear there. We returned the next morning in full daylight to gather our things. Looking back, I wish we had surveyed the area for tracks or some clue as to what it was. But at the time, we did not want to be down there for any longer than what we had to. Having been some years since this happened, I would go down there in a heartbeat and not think anything of it. When I come home, I usually feel a sense of ease in the woods. It feels like a weight is lifted off of your shoulders, knowing there are no cougars or grizzly bears to worry about. For my Western outdoorsy folk, familiar with cougar country, reading this and thinking, I don't feel a weight in the woods, my reply would be the question, have you noticed you've been stalked before? Cougars are some of the sneakiest creatures in the animal kingdom, and just because you've never noticed it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I myself have been stalked. I've written about it all the time. It's a feeling that will stick with you and definitely put you on edge in cougar country for a long time after. I have a colleague who guides Western big game in New Mexico who told me a story once that during a hunt, he had a fellow guide spotting for him, and that guide watched a cougar stalk my friend through the grove of trees before giving up. My friend never had the slightest idea he was being stalked. I believed for an avid outdoorsman in cougar country, it is inevitable. And as far as grizzly country, it's a similar feeling, but a little different. Most ill bear encounters happen because you surprise the bear in thick woods. I have many friends from my time in Alaska who would share stories of being charged by monster grizzlies from out of nowhere. They're just hiking along, and then boom, 800 pounds of death is blasting straight towards them. And the consensus is the same amongst them. If you spend enough time out there, it will happen eventually. I luckily was never charged during my time in Alaska. I avoided known bear hangouts. But the few times I spent time in bear country, I always had this jack-in-the-box anxiety just waiting for it to happen. What is funny, though, is despite that weight being lifted initially, an old feeling always returns. I know it's not some sort of psychological thing having to do with that patch of woods specifically, but I feel it in most places in Appalachia. It's a feeling of being watched, a feeling that something is there, and a feeling of dread. And it amplifies every time you hear some strange crashing in the woods or a sound you cannot explain. Most of the times I've experienced this, I've had a gun, and I think to myself, come on, man, you're the most badass thing out here. Yet, I can never shake the anxiety. My brother, without having ever heard this story, reluctantly asked me over the phone one day, don't think I'm crazy, but have you ever felt creeped out in the woods below the house? I don't know what it is, but every time I go down there, I feel like I'm being watched, and I get filled with dread. Hearing him say that sent shivers down my back, simply because I always dismissed this feeling. I've swept this story under the rug for years, telling myself it was just a bear, etc. To hear my brother, who was a Marine, tell me that certified to me that I was not simply just being afraid. I've only ever felt this in two regions of the country, Appalachia and the redwood forests of Northern California. Now, some of you may listen to this thinking that I'm a nut job Bigfoot believer. I've been reluctant to share this story for that reason. But I want to end this saying, I have no idea what it was that made those calls that night. I also have no idea what it was that busted into our camp. We never did lay our eyes on anything. But I want to reiterate that the story is very true, verbatim to how it happened as I can recall it, without any embellishment. I have no idea what it was, and you can make your own decision as to what you think it was. But being an experienced woodsman, never have I ever experienced something like that since, and I have no worldly explanation for it. Those were the events that transpired that night, and I'll let you make of it what you will. I apologize for being vague. I just want to remove as many signifiers as possible to keep my anonymity. Do note the events took place roughly at night, so it was quite dark. I was walking out to get my partner some soup and apples. She is pregnant and having trouble keeping food and liquids down. Before she asked about the apples, I had taken 5 of the 2 milligram THC gummies. It's perfectly legal, by the way. Since it was dark and getting to be time for our child to go to bed, I decided to take some since I hadn't planned on leaving our home for the evening. So the request caught me off guard. I couldn't drive, so I told her I would walk to grab the stuff. On my way to the store, about halfway through my initial walk, I saw a vehicle drive by me really slowly and stop at the stop sign at the end of the road I was on before you get to the grocery store. The vehicle was possibly an older, roughly older 2000s make, blue-silver SUV. I couldn't get a good look at the emblem on the car, so I couldn't get the make or model of it. However, it could have possibly been a Toyota RAV. They then turned really slowly and stopped for a moment. Then they turned onto a smaller highway that should have been heading away from my location if they continued on that path, probably going roughly 25 to 35 kilometers per hour for about a minute, and then drives off. I get to the store and grab my items. I was only 10 to 15 minutes in the store, and I start walking back to my house. I'm on my way back down the connecting road. I get to the end and then turn left towards a small connecting road going into the neighborhood I generally walk through. I step to the left side of the road onto this small connector, and a similar looking car from earlier pulls by me and starts to turn. It stops after it passes the stop sign at the main road into the neighborhood, and I stopped walking at this point. It stayed there, and I took another step. Once I had taken that step, the vehicle moved forward very slightly, then stops again. It then starts to back up, and then that's when I quickly go across the street, over the small hill to the side to put some distance between me and the vehicle. Also, it would be more difficult to get up the incline. I see he rolled down the window. While I didn't get the best look, he looked like an older white man, maybe 40s or 50s. It was difficult to get the best view in the dark. Also, it looked like he had grayish facial hair. Not too long, more so like a fluffier scruff. I couldn't see, but it looks like he had a hat or something on as well. But what really threw me off were the glasses that looked like sunglasses. I stop for a second and he doesn't say anything. I don't either. I wait for another couple of seconds. Then I started running. I guess they drove off. I didn't really hear the vehicle. I ran about halfway down the street. I tripped and fell over the ice that had accumulated on the ground. I look around to see if I can see that car again. I couldn't see it, so he may have turned around completely at this point. I contemplate if I should ask someone for help. I ring the doorbell on one of the individual's homes in the neighborhood. I start talking to the boy, roughly 13, and ask if his parents are home. I didn't want to say it to him, and I didn't want to scare the poor kid. I was pretty scared, though. I explained to the mother that I believe someone is following me. While she's listening, she's calling for her husband. The husband comes and a car drives by. While being extremely nervous and emotional, I say that's the car, but upon further inspection, I see it was not. I quickly correct myself. I was asking them for help, but my mistake had broken their trust, and the husband tells me to go away. I did because I was extremely sorry for bothering them. I just wanted to go home to my family. Plus, I could get how now they were suspicious of me. I nervously ran through the neighbors' yards until I come up to where I can see car lights in front of the apartment complex in this neighborhood. I suspect if someone is following me, that would be a great place to camp out. Lots of cars come and go there at all times of day and night. I wait out of line of sight of the road and I start moving while still being out of sight. I hear it start moving. I quickly lay down by a tree in the neighbor's front lawn, and the vehicle comes and it looks exactly like the vehicle that had stopped. It was also driving just as slow as last time. It also looks like the window is still rolled down. It goes by and presses the brake for a second while it slows down, and then starts to drive off again. I wait to see it's completely out of sight and I dash towards my home. I fell and my phone flew out of my pocket. I grabbed my stuff and continued to my house. I made it all the way home before the vehicle could come back around. Thankfully, if they are a creep, they don't know where I live. Once inside, I called out to my wife and told her what happened. Something about the very first time seeing that car put me on edge. Other vehicles have passed by me on my walk here and there, but something was really strange about that one. I'm never really put on edge like this. I grew up in a rougher place and have dealt with tons of interesting people. This just set every alarm bell off all at once, saying I was in danger. I contemplated calling the police, but I thought since I had taken the gummies, no one would believe a word I said, and they absolutely would not be at fault for being suspicious. Plus, because I was so on edge, I hadn't even thought about calling them when I first got suspicious. I don't think they would have believed me. So instead, I called my father-in-law for advice. He advised me to do what I'm doing right now, writing down everything that I can remember. If I should encounter the vehicle or the man again, I will call the police with this record. If you think I completely misunderstood this, please tell me. I want to be wrong. I'm so angry and frustrated right now. I could absolutely be wrong, but I don't believe I gave any indication of needing help. Plus, if the individual was trying to help, why the silence with the window down? Why come back around by after I booked it out of there? Especially waiting there, like you were expecting to run this way. My partner and I had a really unsettling experience tonight, and I can't shake the what ifs. I was asleep during this incident, but I woke up to the sound of him rushing back inside our apartment and locking the door. When he told me the details, it left me with an uneasy feeling I can't get past. We live in a suburb that has a reputation for being a bit rough, but a lot of the crime and drug problems are contained in the center of the suburb. Our area is quite sheltered from these problems, and during the day, it's busy and full of people, with a university, a hospital, and locals going about their business. At night, the streets near our building are quiet, but not in an unsettling way. It's usually peaceful as we're tucked away from the main road and surrounded by other apartments in a park. However, the past week has made me feel like things are changing. Last week, we heard a couple arguing loudly in the street from our balcony. It escalated quickly and turned physical, so we called the police, who intervened. Then, just a few nights later, we saw a car pull up near the park. A different woman jumped out and ran into the trees, hiding while the man in the car drove away. He didn't follow her, but we've seen them in the park before. They look like messed up gym rats. He's often yelling at her and calling her stupid, among other colorful names. We never saw her come out of the park and didn't even know if she was still hiding. That time, we didn't call the police. Maybe it was the feeling that it wasn't worth reporting unless it got worse, after already reporting an incident a few days prior. Although these were domestic incidents, I think this reluctance to report suspicious occurrences carried over when this encounter happened with my partner. He told me later he didn't want to get a reputation for calling the police over everything, like the boy who cried wolf, but I wish we had done it sooner. At about 1 a.m., my partner took our dogs out for a quick toilet break before bed. When he returned to the building, he noticed a man and a woman standing outside an apartment on the ground floor, quietly talking. He hadn't seen them before, but didn't think much of it, as there are 8 floors in our building with about 12 apartments on each. He entered the lift, and just as the doors were closing, the man stopped them with his hand and asked if my partner could take them to level 7, as they were locked out. They must have followed somebody through the doors to get inside initially. My partner explained that residents can only access their own floors and told him no. Thinking back, they would have had to sprint from where they were to reach the doors before they closed, which is what had me questioning my partner's situational awareness, but I will continue the story. The man shrugged and said, "Any levels should be fine," and both he and the woman stepped into the lift anyway. My partner told me that he just froze and was trying to analyze the situation in real time. He said they didn't look like the typical meth users or necessarily threatening, but their energy seemed unpredictable. He didn't know how they'd react if he pushed back. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he knew something wasn't right. Not wanting to escalate, he let them in the lift. As the lift went up, the man was looking at my partner in silence, while the woman was crouching towards our dogs, making kissy faces. Even this contrast was unsettling for my partner, as there were no obvious threats here. In fact, you could argue that she was being nice. When the lift reached our floor, the couple told him to step out first, and then they would follow him. My partner walked quickly to our apartment, noticing they weren't too close, but were definitely behind him. As soon as he got inside, he locked the door immediately and started listening. For the next 5 or 10 minutes, he would hear them pacing up and down the hallway, talking in low voices. We couldn't make out what they were saying, but their calm tone made it even creepier. At one point, they opened the fire escape door across from our apartment and held it open while still talking in low voices. Eventually, they let it close, and after that, everything went quiet. Since we don't have a peephole, my partner got on the floor by the door, trying to see them through the crack underneath. I crouched with him, but he could only make out faint movements before they finally left. An hour later, after we were certain the hallway was silent, we carefully opened the door and checked the hallway and fire escape together. They were definitely gone, but my partner was still shaken. He kept replaying the situation in his head, wondering if they could have hurt him if he'd refused to let them stay in the lift. I insisted that we report them to the police and ended up providing their descriptions, just in case they were still loitering around. I wished he hadn't let them see where we live, but I understand why he froze. He keeps saying their energy was off, and he didn't know what they would do if he told them no. I'd like to think I'd have refused to let them in the lift at all, but honestly, I don't know how I'd react in the moment. The thought of what could have happened if they'd lash out makes my stomach turn. The whole week has made me feel like our area isn't as safe as it once was, and this incident was the final straw. Why would they follow him to our floor, linger for so long, and hold the fire escape door open before committing to leaving? Their calmness only made it more unnerving. If they were truly dangerous, they would have forced their way inside as my partner opened the door. It leaves me with some hope that they were just opportunists, and maybe I don't need to worry about them coming back tonight. The door is double bolted and the extra lock is on. My partner is now sleeping soundly, but I'm still wide awake and alert. To the man and woman who thought any level should be fine and follow my partner to our door, I hope we never run into each other again. It was a night like any other on the desolate highways that crisscross through the heart of nowhere. My name's Jake, and I'm a truck driver. Been hauling cargo through the lonesome roads for over a decade. The kind of life that keeps you company with the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt. That night, I found myself on a particularly eerie stretch of road, swallowed by an impenetrable fog, the kind that wraps around you like a suffocating shroud concealing the world behind. The only companions were the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the mist and the rhythmic beat of raindrops on the roof of my rig. I've heard rumors on the CB radio about this stretch, a place where truckers whispered of abandoned cars, tales of drivers gone missing without a trace. It was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned drivers, but I'd always scoffed at such stories. That is, until that night. As I maneuvered through the winding road, the fog became denser, almost palpable. Visibility dropped to a few feet ahead, and the low hum of the engine seemed swallowed up by an oppressive silence. The glow of the headlights refracted off the mist, casting eerie shadows that danced like wraiths in the night. It was then that I saw him, a silhouette on the top of the road. A man, or so it seemed, standing motionless in the fog. My instincts told me to keep going, but the human in me wanted to lend a helping hand. I eased off the gas, and the truck rolled to a stop beside him. He was oddly pale, and the fog clung to his form like a ghostly cloak. But what sent a shiver down my spine were his eyes. Big, round, and as black as the void itself. His mouth, a gaping maw, stretched wide in a manner that defied the laws of anatomy. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was terribly wrong. The man-creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. He just stood there, staring into the fog. With a lump in my throat, I decided to get going. But as I revved up the engine, I glanced back at him. That's when I saw it. The twisted, grotesque smile that curled on his featureless face. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, leaving the fog-draped figure behind. As I drove away, I grabbed the radio mic to share my unsettling encounter with fellow truckers. To my dismay, the once buzzing airwaves were silent. No static, no voices, just an unsettling void that mirrored the fog outside. The road seemed endless, and I pushed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring in protest. I needed distance from that creature, needed the safety of the city lights. But as the miles blurred together, the fog persisted, unyielding. I drove way over 100 miles and was sure that creature was far away and I will never meet it again. In the distance, a lonely parking lot emerged, and I decided it was time to pull over. The weariness and fear clawed at me, and I desperately needed a moment to collect myself. I shut off the engine, closed the curtains, and tried to shake off the encounter as mere imagination. Little did I know that that night had only just begun, and the horrors lurking in the fog were far from done with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and nestled into my bunk, hoping that the haunting image of that pale figure with the unnaturally large eyes and twisted smile would fade away with the night. But sleep remained elusive. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, a sense of impending doom washed over me, jolting me awake. A shiver ran down my spine as I fumbled to open the curtains. The parking lot was bathed in an eerie glow from the flickering overhead lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fog. That's when I saw them again. 3 of those nightmarish creatures. They stood like sentinels, their dark eyes fixed on my truck. Panic gripped me as I fumbled to turn on the cab lights, revealing their ghastly features in all their horrifying glory. Their mouths wide open, entitled guttural growls that reverberated throughout the metal walls of the truck. The air in the cabin grew thick with an otherworldly presence, a malevolence that seeped through every pore of my being. I reached for the ignition, praying that the truck would roar to life and carry me far away from this nightmare. But nothing happened. The engine remained silent, as if in protest against the encroaching terror. The creatures, sensing my vulnerability, began to advance. Their movements were unsettlingly smooth, almost as if they were gliding across the asphalt. The growls intensified, echoing through the desolate parking lot. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back as desperation set in. My hands trembled as I repeatedly turned the key, willing the engine to respond. The growls escalated into a cacophony, and the creatures closed in, their features contorted in a grotesque display of hunger. Just as the creatures were about to reach the truck, a surge of relief washed over me as the engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into drive, the truck jolting forward, leaving the creatures behind in the rearview mirror. As the truck sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were not bound by the laws of this physical world. Their terrifying growls echoed in the distance, even as the city lights finally emerged on the horizon. I dared to glance back, and to my horror, I saw the creatures running after the truck with unnatural speed, far beyond anything human. It was as if the shadows themselves were chasing me. As I drove into the welcoming glow of city lights, the creatures abruptly halted. Their twisted forms lingered at the edge of the urban sprawl, their growls fading into the night. Relief mingled with a lingering dread as I realized that they had a boundary, a limit to their reach. I parked the truck in a well-lit area, surrounded by the comforting hum of civilization. My hands trembled as I reached the radio mic once more, hoping to connect with someone, anyone. But the static-filled airwaves remained stubbornly silent. The city light seemed to push back the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were still out there, waiting in the shadows for their next opportunity to strike. The night was far from over, and the road ahead held more horrors than I could fathom. I spent the restless hours of the night parked in that well-lit haven, the city lights warding off the encroaching darkness. But no matter how brightly the urban landscape glowed, the images of those nightmarish creatures lingered in the recesses of my mind, their growls echoing like a sinister melody. As dawn began to break, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of fog with a newfound paranoia. The city lights gradually faded into the rearview mirror as the road stretched into another desolate expanse. My radio crackled to life. The sudden sound made me jump. It was the voice, a fellow trucker. "Hey, you there, you okay?" The voice sounded concerned, and I eagerly responded, recounting the horrors of the night, the fog-shrouded figures, the broken radio, and the unrelenting pursuit. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke, heavy with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You are not alone. We've all heard these stories. the abandoned cars, the creatures in the fog, but we always thought they were just stories. The revelations sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had faced those monstrous entities. The radio buzzed with hushed conversations among truckers, each sharing their own encounters with the supernatural on this stretch of road. The stories varied, but a common thread emerged. Those creatures, with their haunting eyes and twisted smiles, were a malevolent force that seemed drawn to the lonely roads in the dead of night. No one knew of their origin or their purpose, but they left a trail of fear in their wake. As I continued my journey, the unease persisted. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the fog clung to the edges of the highway like a malevolent specter. I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were watching, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. The radio chatter intensified, with truckers exchanging advice on how to avoid the creatures, sharing tales of those who had disappeared without a trace. The fear was palpable, a shared experience that bound us together in the force of the unknown. With each passing mile, the city lights became a distant memory. The road ahead was swallowed by an impenetrable fog, and the radio once again fell silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood at end, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. As I approached the familiar stretch where I first encountered the creatures, a sense of dread settled over me. The fog thickened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Then, a haunting realization struck me. This road was a loop, an unending circuit that brought travelers back to the heart of the supernatural. The city lights, the camaraderie on the radio, all illusions meant to deceive. The creatures weren't bound by distance. They were bound by time, forever hunting those who dared traverse this cursed stretch. A guttural growl echoed through the fog, and the twisted figures emerged once again. Their black eyes bore into my soul, their gaping mouths emitting an otherworldly wail. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest, but the truck seemed tethered to the nightmarish loop. As the creatures closed in, the fog swallowed everything, and the road became an unending void. The last thing I saw were those eyes, an abyss that seemed to consume all light. The radio crackled to life one final time, a chorus of terrified voices screaming a warning. But it was too late. The creatures closed in, and the world descended into darkness. And so, the haunted highway claimed another victim, lost to the eternal night and the malevolent creatures that lurked within the fog. The loop continued, a never-ending cycle of horror, trapping the unwary in an unending nightmare. The road stretched on, shrouded in fog, a haunted path that few dreaded to traverse, and even fewer escaped. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these 7 true scary stories. I would like to acknowledge the rest of the membership to Back to Ashes. Thank you for your continued support, as you are the glue that holds everything together. For anyone new to the channel, thank you so much for your support. For without you, I would not have a voice, and Back to Ashes would not exist. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this selection. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.